So, Steven.
Which one?
You, Eckert.
What's up?
You like the new lights that I got in the ceiling?
I do.
LED's finest, man.
They've been, I guess, they haven't been there for a while.
No, I've been dealing with...
Since you moved in.
Well, no, it's been about 8 months since all the bulbs started to die in my office. I had one light left in my office. Actually, they all died. Actually, everyone was dead in the office, but when he got up there to change them, one went back on, but we changed them all out. My dad does lighting. My brother does lighting. It's just that 18-foot ceilings
are hard to get to.
You know, I've got a big-ass ladder in the hallway, but trying to get that stuff changed, but he changed it, and man, oh manowitz are those great lights.
Well, for the longest time, you were using your Westcott lights and bouncing them off the ceiling and just
for
using
dinner.
that as just your light at night.
Yeah.
And when you would come in here at night, it's like pitch black. Like
right.
You can't see anything.
But now it's like up till the middle point, everything's really bright on this side, and then I got no light over
just
there.
A big fall off.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to have light.
Finally.
All right, we ready?
Let's do it.
Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. Welcome to Raw Talk, episode 106, where we are going to go and interview Mr. Bruce Bennett, one of the most well-known photographers in the NHL or in hockey history. If there was a Hockey Hall of Fame for photographers, he'd be in it. I think I ended up asking him that question after the fact. Let me make myself a note because I'll bring that up after because we did discuss it.
Yep.
Hockey Hall of Fame.
Well, actually, we didn't technically interview him just yet. We're actually going to run over to the venue, interview him real quick, and then come back.
Yeah, we're going to run over to the venue. So we already interviewed Bruce. It was awesome, but we're going to talk more about that as we go on. We're going to get into photo news. Enjoy. And that brings it. Thank you for the news.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Very interesting news today. So, it's time to head on out to the stadium. I wanted to give just some information before we get out there. Because when I do the interviews, you always say this, you just go in and you just start.
Yeah.
And yes, I just go in and I just start.
Because I don't think they're aware that you're starting the interview. That's why I'm concerned.
A lot of people that do interviews, I've been listening to a lot of different podcasts, they are rolling when the people start walking into the room. So they get the intro, hey, how have you been? And because there's usually some questions that start right off the bat.
But what you don't see behind the scenes is they're probably letting them know, hey, we're rolling. You're going to go right into it. Be prepared.
Well, and I let him know that I wasn't going to introduce him and I wasn't going to do that stuff because I said I would have already introduced you by the time we get here.
Gotcha.
So basically, Bruce Bennett is one of the most well-known hockey photographers of all time. He's a guy that I looked up to when I was 14 years old and saw him on the front of this magazine, this news trade. I think it was he told me what it was. I don't think he said it. It was Unique Photo. I believe it was the Unique Photo magazine. They put out this little thing and it was an article about him and he's on the cover and he's with a white lens, he's got his Canon lenses, he's standing on the ice, and I'm like, I want that white lens. I want to be like that guy. And every day I'd go into school and into class and I'd read it because I just kept reading it to learn as much as I could. I read the thing 8 million times, but that was something that I was so interested in. So his story fascinated me that he just started in 1972 or something, shooting up in the stands as a guy that shot in the stands, and then he found his way. Well, you'll hear the story of how he worked his way from shooting in the stands to becoming pretty much the team photographer for 4 NHL teams at once.
It's amazing how that works.
Yeah, and so I followed him all along. I had interactions with him in the past where when I was shooting at the Flyers as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, I would see that. It's Bruce Bennett going by. I never talked to him. I was like, hey, Einstein.
Speaking of Einstein.
He's like,
he does look a lot.
He looks like Einstein, and he brought that up himself.
Which is not a bad thing to look like.
No, I wouldn't mind looking like Einstein, but it was really cool. Before we started, he was talking about the 1DX and how he just sat down with his mother, who's 89 years old, to try to film her and get information out of her. And that obviously, I could bring up the stories about Lil and how I did the same thing. So that was cool how we had that discussion. But let me tell you how we brought this about. First, I contacted Bruce on Twitter, and I got his information. He said, I'm like, hey, I'd like to interview you.
Oh, he has a Twitter. I'm actually surprised about that.
But he really doesn't use it.
Okay.
So I was like, how do I get in touch? So he gave me an email. I emailed with information, what I wanted to do, sent him some of the other interviews we did. And he checked with Getty because Getty basically is his employer. They bought out BBS or Bruce Bennett Studios back in the day. And he's like, we got the green light. I'm like, so are you in Philly anytime soon to shoot a game? Because you could either come over to the loft, or why don't I try to get us down to the bench, the Flyers at the Flyers game, to shoot it on the bench. So I have PR contacts that I don't know, cultivated over the years. And I reached out to them, and I was just like, hey, opening game, it's coming up. Bruce Bennett's coming into town to shoot. I would like to do an interview with him before the Flyers game. I also made sure to say that we don't want to stay for the game. We're not looking to shoot. We want to come in, and be out. And my idea is that we can shoot it on the bench. I got an email back. That's no problem. It was really quick. He came back to me and was like, that's no problem, as long as you're out by 4.
I am actually somewhat surprised just because none of that is being used for the Flyers promotion. Like, all of it's obviously just for us and the photographer, but as far as the Flyers go, that's why I'm surprised they kind of approved that.
Well, I guess because
before the game,
I have
guess.
this long-standing relationship with the PR people over there.
They were great when we went there.
Yeah, he'd made sure we were fine.
Mm-hmm.
They were testing the lights out, so you'll see in the interview that it starts with the lights off because they were testing the opening game lights, and then they popped on, then we stopped and we restarted just so that we could get the lighting right.
Mm-hmm.
But geez, I was looking forward to this interview so much. I've wanted to talk to Bruce for a long time, and we finally got to sit here, have this conversation, just standing on the bench at the Wells Fargo Center, and I think it's time that we let you guys give it a listen. So go ahead, enjoy this interview with Mr. Bruce Bennett.
A couple of guys laying on the ground made a comment about my Ralph Lauren shirt. Hey, Ralph Lauren, is that you?
Yeah.
And I just ignored him, and I got to the street corner and getting ready to cross, and he goes, "You're not Ralph Lauren, you're Einstein." So I pointed at the guy. It's a nice exchange.
Is that does it happen more with the drunk fans in New York?
It happens, yeah, it does actually. The Ranger fans are boisterous. Makes it more fun.
Fans.
Yeah.
Now where?
Well, you grew up in Philly, I assume, so have to say that.
I grew up, well, yeah, we never got along with the Rangers fans. I mean, did you grow up as a Rangers fan?
I did. Grew up on Long Island outside of New York City, and grew up as a Ranger fan until the Islanders came around.
Really?
Then it was just a natural progression because they were 15 minutes from home to become an Islander fan.
So I guess my dad would kill me if I didn't ask. Were you there the night Leon Stickle blew the call? 1980?
I can neither confirm or deny that Leon Stickle blew the call at any time. I think what I liked best about that entire scenario was the next season, Leon grew a mustache. He was a great guy, by the way. I know you don't think so.
Well, no, I mean, I'm an official too, so I know what it's like to blow a call,
right.
Except not in the Stanley Cup game that
bad.
Turned the whole series.
It's bad. But the next season, he grew the mustache, and some fan at the Spectrum had a giant sign of a mustache, and it just said, "We know who you are."
So that was the guy behind the same guy who still comes down now?
Probably, yeah.
He
still
does.
Down here in that corner. Yeah.
He's been around a long time.
Yeah.
So you're coming up, this is your 40th season?
Yeah, that's scary. Yeah, I know.
40
yeah.
seasons of shooting hockey.
Yeah.
That's insane. So you started off shooting from the stands?
Started off as a naive 18-year-old kid. Took some pictures from the balcony at Madison Square Garden. Took some pictures during the warm-ups at an Islander game and sent them to the Hockey News, which was up in Montreal at that time. Asked them if they wanted to buy photos, and they responded, "Yeah, we'll give you $3 a photo.
Nice.
And do you need a press pass, or can you get out into the games on your own?" So I opted for the press pass, and 1974-75 season, I started shooting.
So the Flyers won the Cup that year?
74-75,
73-74 and 74-75.
If you say so.
Because I believe on your site it said that the first Stanley Cup you covered was 76 when the Flyers lost to the Canadians.
Right.
Unfortunately.
At the Spectrum. So that was the first Cup presentation that I shot. The early years, I was just doing local games, Islanders and Rangers, occasional Flyer games. But as I got more and more into it, I started traveling around a little bit more, and started with that. The first Cup presentation was in Philly that year, 76.
So where did the love of photography come from?
I think, my father was big in documenting everything he did, not only with the written word, but also photographically. I actually just put together a self-published book of his old photo albums from World War II. And it was all photographs that he shot overseas and in his military training, and then long manuscripts. And he encouraged me to shoot photographs when I was growing up.
What was the first camera?
I think it was an Argus Cassina, 35 millimeter Argus Cassina with a 135 millimeter Acura brand lens, Acura. I don't think they're around anymore. Exactly.
So you went from, started shooting in the stands, you probably didn't get a lot of crap to bring cameras in then.
Right.
As nowadays, they'll tell you that any professional camera you can't bring in.
Right.
Do you know what I tell them?
Yeah.
I said, any camera in my hand's a professional camera. No, but they don't. They do stuff like that now.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of different than a lot of guys got started that way. For me, it was really those 2 games, and the following season, I was in the photo box shooting pictures. So I got my experience really shooting pro games, which is highly unusual.
Right. I mean, my first time shooting the Flyers was at 15. I had an easier way in. My cousin was an intern.
Right.
But that was one of the ways that I was able to get access. And then the next year I had a season credential because I was shooting for one of the local publications. I basically did the same thing you did. Hey, can I get here's photos I've done, and then they're like, we'll set you up for a pass and you'll be our guy.
I mean, in the early days, most of the photographers I was shooting alongside, if they weren't newspaper or wire service photographers, there were guys who faked their way in by faking letters to say who they were working for, when they were in fact just putting pictures on their walls or just doing it to get experience.
Wow.
Most of the guys got started that way.
Which is, it's much harder to do that today.
It is. Every sport is controlled now by the leagues and the credentialing. Everyone is more concerned about their rights, the trademarks of the logos, how images are going to be used. Are you going to be making prints and taking money out of people's pockets?
Right. I mean, my big thing when I'm requesting anything from a musician or especially from these venues, like I'll come down and shoot a Flyers game, they'll let me in. I'll say, I'm not selling any images. Anything that I take is for the website just to teach people and stuff like that. So I try to be as honest with them as possible because they'll get you if you try to.
There are still some teams that bend on the NHL rules for admittance. Most of them go by the NHL's guidelines and say there are no freelancers allowed in. You know, it's difficult when kids come to me looking, for advice on how they get started. To get your experience in the minor leagues, where you can do a little barter deal, give me a pass and I'll give you some photos. Look for weekly newspapers or, lower, well, now it's all websites. Find websites that'll sponsor you and say you're working for them. Right, and get your experience that way before you try doing NHL stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the easiest to get in here, and we know that, and a lot's changed. Were you a hockey fan?
I
always?
was, yeah. Growing up, I used to play, whether it was floor hockey, street hockey, roller hockey, and then ice hockey. Natural progression when you're a kid, and followed the NHL pretty closely.
Right, and back then you had the original 6 until coming into the 70s, and then they started to expand out.
Yeah, I found my niche early for some reason. Through the years, I tried a little bit of everything else, whether it was football, baseball, soccer, but I always gravitated back to hockey. And the client base that I built through the years, they basically knew me as a hockey shooter. So it was even hard to convince our clients that we were capable of shooting other things.
Right. So how do you make the transition? You're an 18-year-old kid. You get your passes for the Hockey News. You get in. You start shooting games. How do you become the official photographer for 4 NHL teams?
Bribery. No, it wasn't that. It was basically getting published as often as I did in the Hockey News. The reputation spread.
The name, saying the name and just building a brand.
Right. In the Islanders was they were the first team that I was team photographer for, and that was starting in 1982. And strangely enough, the Cup run, they had fired their public relations director and hired a new public relations director. And I had thought the year before they were looking at making a change, but once this PR director disappeared in 1982, I said, okay, well, that's over with. I don't even know the new guy. And then he called me out of the blue and introduced himself. And I said to him, by the way, where did you get my name? Where did you even think of me from? And he said it was Bill Torrey, the general manager, had suggested that I call you.
Right.
So started in 82 with the Islanders, picked up the Flyers in 1987, the Devils in...
Well, so you pick up the Flyers as they go to the Cup.
Yeah.
In 87 with Hextall.
Yeah, it was
rookie year.
It was good timing. And really, it was just reputation. Myself and the crew of photographers that I built at that time, we were all hockey specialists. we all knew how to shoot stock photography, good individual verticals of each player, and cover all the action off as well.
Because I remember there's a shot when I was walking through the Flyers back offices. It's a shot of. There's like 8 guys in the shot. There's guys sliding across the front. You've got the triangle of players in front of the net. I was looking for it today. I couldn't find it online, but I remember seeing that. And I know that with hockey, you have the individual shots they're fine. The card companies buy those unless they send their own people out. But it's the action shots. What do you look for? What is the quintessential hockey shot to you?
Eyes. It's all about the eyes. So, early on I noticed that most of the wire service guys would stay upstairs looking for that moment of the game, the puck bulging the net, a key moment, a key play. From up there, the game is slower. It's easier to focus. It's easier for a guy who's doing baseball one day, football the next, press conference the next day, and then he gets thrown on a hockey game and he's a little lost. At ice level, the players move a lot faster. So these guys would sit up there not only because it was easier, make sure they got the moment. For me, I realized early on it was about the eyes. You can tell, I can tell walking into a game, looking at players, whether they give a shit or they don't give a shit. I mean, you can see everything in the eyes. The eyes tell you everything about whether a player is engaged in the action or he's thinking about doing something else.
Or he has 6 concussions and is in La La Land.
Yeah, and those eyes are all
in
over
the
the
case
place.
that you had here a lot in the 90s with Lindros.
Yeah.
So when you're shooting at the old Devils, what was that called?
Continental Airlines Arena.
So when you're shooting there and they let you sit between the benches to shoot,
Right.
I used to watch the games and see guys without helmets, and you or with helmets. You were one always without helmet, right?
Yeah.
What's it like to shoot right there for an NHL game?
The late great Lou Capizzola, who was a photographer with
Yeah.
Sports Illustrated, had said to me many times, this is by far the best photo position in professional sports. The smell of liniment, players rushing past you, the constant fear about getting hit, worrying about where players and pucks were going to come from. You felt like you were a part of the game.
Yeah.
And most arenas now, there is no position like that. It's center ice where you're free to shoot the entire ice surface. Now we're all stuck in holes in the corners.
If you can even get holes in the glass.
Right, limited amount, total of maximum 8 holes in any NHL arena. But I do remember like the early days, when I first started shooting at Madison Square Garden, the penalty box and the photo box were one long section that was about 50 to 60 feet wide, and the pucks and sticks and players came from every direction. And I remember it like it was yesterday. Middle of the night, I would wake up, flinching, twisting. It was nightmares. I mean, I literally had nightmares worrying about getting hit from those photo positions.
Did you ever get hit?
I got hit many times.
Did you ever get stitched up and then come back?
Yeah, strangely enough, the worst cut was probably just 2 or 3 years ago. Nassau Coliseum, right before Thanksgiving. The puck hit the net. I was sitting in the corner and the puck hit the net harmlessly, and it just fluttered down and caught me on a vein at the top of the head.
Wow.
And I had my hand here, so oh man, that hurt, and I pulled my hand away and it spurted onto my hand. So my first thing was like, I should get out of here because the fans are going to start to freak. So I walked towards the back, and then I heard somebody's rubber gloves snapping on, and they took me into the locker room. Had me on a table, and 2 doctors, 2 of the team doctors came in and was working on me. And, I could see through in the other room, and the goaltender, Rick DiPietro, was sitting there rehabbing, and he just looks at me and he just shakes his head in disbelief. So that was six metal stitches in my head. That was the worst.
But did you come back in the next period to shoot?
No, luckily it was late in the third period or middle of the third period.
But you would have.
Maybe not. I was a little woozy.
Yeah, I definitely. Has anybody, sitting on the bench, do the players acknowledge you? Have they acknowledged you through the years?
There was some. I think throughout my career, I prided myself on maintaining distance from the athletes. Some of the players that I did one-on-one shoots with, sure, I'd get to know them a little more. You'd shoot them at an all-star game, you'd shoot them at an NHL award ceremony, and they would recognize you. So there's sometimes you'll have players who will like look over and wink at you or nod, but for the most part, I kind of turn a blind eye to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I remember walking down here as a 15-year-old kid with a credential and getting stopped by every single security guard, and then you walk past like a Chris Pronger when he was playing for St. Louis, and it's like touching the ceiling, and you're just trying not to make eye contact, just keeping to yourself. That was one of the things I always remembered. I mean, it was fun. I mean, this is fun. Could you see doing anything else?
Well, I do have my BS in accounting, so I could always go back to that, I guess.
Right.
I always had something to fall back on.
Whoa!
That
There
could
go the
hurt.
lights. So we're gonna
Take your break.
We're gonna stop and take the break and check these lights for 1 second.
Yeah, baby.
All right. So you saw the lights popped on. That's something that happens when they're getting ready for opening game here at the Wells Fargo Center, which has had 12 names before. But so they just popped these lights on. You were letting me know that there are officially LED lights here.
Yeah. It's it seems to be the new trend in most of these arenas. It saves, as I understand, they save a fortune on electricity costs. They're instant on, unlike the old ones that used to warm up, and it's a super high intensity and quality of light is gorgeous.
Yeah. You were saying that this was one of the worst rinks to shoot at before.
Yeah, it's Madison Square Garden and this arena here, whatever they're calling it now.
Wells Fargo.
Wells Fargo, thank you. Both of these were really probably in the bottom 5 arenas in the NHL in terms of lighting.
Which is horrible. So that brings up a question, right? 40 years of shooting this. What are the major changes in technology over those 40 years?
Right. Well, of course, digital, of course, is the biggest one, and all the changes that have centered on changing to digital. The early days, we would shoot film, and you would find out the next day or a couple of days later whether you were in focus, whether you had the moment or not. Now you know instantly when you've screwed up. So that helps. That's the biggest difference. Obviously, is the digital change.
Well, so you go back in the 70s. What were you shooting 800 speed film back then?
Shooting Tri-X black and white, 400 ISO, push process to 1600 or so. Either in AccuFine or we use something called Edwall, FG7. It worked for us. We modified their formula a little bit. Myself and the other guys who worked for me had little tweaks that we would do to get the images to come out correctly. And then when we started shooting color slide, no color negative, we would go to color slide. It was either Ektachrome tungsten for Madison Square Garden or regular Ektachrome for the other arenas.
So you were manually focusing all these lenses?
I was a Nikon guy for about 25 years, manually focusing their 180-2.8 or manually focusing, I think it was a Vivitar 85-205, 3.8. I'm pretty sure that was it. And then in later years, a Nikon, I guess it was an 80-200, but I never really thought that there was that much of a skill level to doing it. It was just something that you just kind of had it in your head. I did so many games that you got to the point where your hand would actually kind of focus and rack the zoom without you even giving it much thought.
Wow, that's good. I personally have trouble with manual. Always had trouble. Eyes aren't sharp to begin with. Don't shoot with glasses, and it's just been my first lens was the 80-200 2.8 Nikon. It's the only lens I ever bought, and people were like, "Why are you buying that? That's not the right lens." I'm like, "I'm shooting hockey.
Right.
That's the right lens for hockey.
Right.
Not a wide angle." So you have the changes in technology. You get your first digitals coming into the late 90s, early 2000s.
Late 90s, sure.
You're looking at those
late 90s.
$30,000 weird cameras.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't jump in right away. We would shoot with strobes, which is a whole nother topic, but we'd use strobes that are going off now.
Which is the worst thing to let anybody know about, because if you tell somebody what the strobes are when they're at the game, then they'll see it every time it pops.
And players, and you would see players. I remember one of the players on the Islanders, everything is going along very nicely, and you pop once, you test, and all the lights going, and I could see the one player, and he's like, obviously distracted. Maybe his head wasn't in the game, but he's looking up, and then I see him nudge the player next to him, and the player next to him points to the lights, and before you know it, the referee comes over and says, who's tripping the lights in the rafters? The next game, no problem at all. And you'd go a ton of games until someone would get distracted by the lights.
And now, I mean, as a player, you really don't notice it.
You know what? I remember playing media games on the ice and having one of my guys shoot strobes. Wouldn't even have any idea that the strobes were being used.
It's just when somebody needs to yell at something. Could
Yeah.
you imagine? Could you imagine like Tortorella on the bench
Oh, yeah.
going nuts over a?
That would give him another excuse.
And he would. He
Uh-huh.
could possibly do that.
Yeah.
So that's definitely interesting. So how do you keep it fresh? How do you keep the hockey shots different from year to year?
Maybe I don't. I don't know. There were a lot of times I'll just sit in the arena and just look around the arena and say, what haven't I done before? Where have I not put a camera that I've got the availability to put a camera? Last year I made a big splash, I guess, with an infrared camera. I had a Mark III that I was using as a paperweight, and I had it converted to infrared, and almost as a lark, put up a few photos, started using it at a couple of games, and all of a sudden that was something fresh and new that people hadn't seen for many years.
Yeah. And how about when did goal cameras start going in?
Started before I got started. I think John Zimmerman from Sports Illustrated was the first guy to try it. I started. I guess I started probably in the mid '80s. Was the first time I put a camera in the net.
Did it have a housing?
First time it did not, and it was one of those games at Madison Square Garden. I remember it very well because in the first 5 minutes of play, players came into the net and flipped it upside down, and I felt a guy tapping me on the shoulder, and the PR guy for the NHL was there, and he said, I think it's time for our experiment to end. So at the end of the period, we took the camera out.
How were you triggering it then?
Remotes.
There were remotes.
Back then, I believe it was Hawk was the brand of remote. Yeah, it was Hawk, and then we used something from the company Quantum, and they had remotes. And now the industry just seems all Pocket Wizard.
As long as they stay in business.
Well, yeah, I know they've eliminated their Multimax, but the other products are still being made.
Yeah. Were there photographers before you that you looked up to in sports or in general?
Well, I was mentored to some extent by a photographer by the name of Joe DiMaggio and his wife Joanne Kalish. They work out of Pennsylvania somewhere, doing still active in the industry, and Joe really took me under his wing and helped teach me about photography and life in general.
Yeah. It takes a mentor. A couple weeks ago, I had my first mentor on. I used to hang out at the camera store, and they'd just help me.
Right.
And I remember coming down to the Flyers when I first started. I had Rick Burke helped me the first time I rented strobes. I'm a 15-year-old kid, cut the check for the $300 to rent strobes, didn't know what the hell I was doing. Nobody told me I needed a zip line or anything to go plug in, and so he helped me out. And then Rusty all those years would just sit here on the bench and just talk photography to help, which is great.
It was very difficult when I was growing up because I could get most of the news guys were old timers who saw me as a threat, saw any of the young guys as a threat, and none of them wanted to share information. I think probably the first 20 games I shot at Madison Square Garden when I started out, all the negatives were thin because I knew nothing about pushing film or rating a film at 1600 ISO and over-processing. I knew nothing about that, and there really wasn't anyone I could ask.
Right.
So a lot of it was trial and error. A lot growing up, I would go to the library and read everything that I could find. There's still libraries.
It's like the internet, but before our time.
Oh, really? Is it? Oh, okay.
This sort of, you added the Dewey Decimal
thing?
all
that stuff. Yeah. So, and that's really where I got most of my information.
So one question I had written down was, can you go to a game to watch?
Never.
It's just not the same.
No, it's so aggravating. It's because I look at things that I wish I had shot.
You see all the images as they go by.
Yeah, and that's why actually when I'm home, I rarely watch on TV also. I'd rather watch a movie or something else because I get too involved thinking I should have shot that, or I hope my photographer's on location. I hope he got this. Was he at the right angle? I start stressing about it.
Right. I remember I used to sit at home when I was learning with an empty camera and shoot the players as they turned around the circles. I was starting to learn how to anticipate the action.
Right.
Because in hockey, that's everything, is anticipating the action. When their head and eyes come forward, like you said, watch the eyes. I used to sit there and just shoot to learn.
Yeah. Well, anticipation is big. It's also instinct and
Knowing the game.
and experience. You know, people don't think you need the experience. And there was a guy who shot a game for me recently who just thought he was going to step in and be a superstar. And you look at the images and you just go, you know, you see this all the time where someone thinks that they can just step in and, oh, you know, I got a camera and it's autofocus and, you know, I look at the back of the camera, I get the exposure, what could I do wrong?
Right.
And sometimes they're just so far off that they have to understand that, you know, let me step back. In the early days, when a guy would start with me in the 70s, he'd start shooting for me, first thing I'd do is they'd shoot a game and they'd be discouraged. And I would tell them, go look at what I shot in 74, 75, 76, 77. It is crap. It is a lot of stuff out of focus, players too small in the frame. It takes a long time until you actually realize how to shoot.
I just came across my box of first negatives shooting the Flyers. I'm having them all scanned right now so I can show everybody the same exact thing.
Right.
Out of focus, wrong timing, everything is just bad.
Right.
So you have all these guys shooting for you. You're under Bruce Bennett Studios. You build up this huge archive of images. Does Getty knock on your door, or do you go looking?
You know, things sometimes in life, whether you're taking pictures or just in life in general, the timing works out well. In this case, I had been working a deal with Wire Image, and things weren't going so well. We were getting to a point where the NHL was starting to restrict photographers coming in, doing freelance kind of stuff like I was doing. And hi there. You know, so the NHL was starting to restrict, like the other leagues, photographers who were coming in to shoot. We were looking at a lockout year coming up.
95?
95.
Flyers were good that year.
Yeah, 94, 95. And I had, as I said, I had a deal with Wire Image, and I was talking to them about expanding the deal. And basically I called Getty and I said, look, you know, you guys expressed some interest in the past. If we're going to talk about anything, let's talk now. And we talked and it just came together.
Nice. And so they got the whole archive?
Yeah, the archive is resting comfortably out in Los Angeles, where we have researchers who can go mine the pictures that are there. The industry pretty much for that kind of stuff is scan on demand. So when I joined Getty, there were around 140,000 images that were already digitized by my company. And now when someone calls for something, they go and they find it in print, negative, or slide, and scan that for that client as well as putting it up on the website.
So the big question is, do you shoot RAW when you're shooting the hockey images?
No.
Why?
I gotta say more.
Yeah, you got to say why.
Speed of downloading the cards into the computer. That's part one. And the most important thing is hitting deadlines, getting pictures out early. Part two is the software that we use for Getty Images does not ingest the RAWs. We'll only ingest JPEGs.
That's terrible design on their part.
Yeah. I mean, we've had some discussions through the last couple of years. Some of my clients are now asking for RAWs where possible. Not sure if that's going to change. Right now, the only thing that I do in RAW in a whole year would be when I do team photos.
Sure. All right. So what is your position at Getty?
I am Director of Photography, Hockey Imagery. It's a good title, right?
It's a good title.
I made that myself.
And how many people are under you?
Well, it's kind of weird. I have the Director of Sport Photographers is over me. I'm like a glorified photographer. So I shoot and I handle the hockey end of things. So I share a piece of all our staff photographers. So if there's hockey for them to shoot, I contact them. I work out their schedules with an assignment editor to make sure they're available. Determine what stringers and freelancers we'll use to fill in. I deal with clients to make sure they're getting what they want. So it's anything to do with hockey worldwide, I touch.
Do you get first choice on games?
I do, yeah. Yeah, that's the benefit.
So you did you've done a ton of Olympics.
Yeah, I think this past year in Sochi was only my 4th Olympics. You do a ton of games when you're there, 2 or 3 games a day for most games, but
Wow.
it's usually great hockey.
Oh, so there was a question. 2000 and whatever year the Flyers had the 5 overtime game in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
It was
Yep.
Primo ends up scoring in 5 overtimes. The question is, how many rolls a game did you bring in the playoffs? How many
Yeah.
rolls would you bring? And was there a point where you ever ran out of film?
Yeah. Sorry, you're a Flyer guy. I'm an Islander guy, sort of.
Well, I hope you ran out in between 80 and 84. You ran out of film.
Pat LaFontaine scores in the 3rd overtime, I think it was, in Mother's Day game, or the night before Mother's Day in Washington, D.C. New York Islanders had flown me down for that game, and you're just chugging along. I don't even know, I think probably I brought 8 to 10 rolls of film, and back then you weren't shooting 8 to 10 frames a second. It was
Right.
probably 5, 6, I don't even remember. And we got to the first overtime, and you start conserving what you've got left, and then you're getting to the second overtime, and you're starting asking other photographers if they have film. I borrowed some rolls of some rolls of black and white from a few guys, and anytime anybody would I got to the point where anybody would take a shot, I would shoot a frame or 2.
And then wait for something.
And then wait. So I believe it was color slide film is what I had bummed from somebody for the final goal and got a good shot of LaFontaine shooting the puck.
Right. Is there a favorite shot throughout the years that you have?
I last season I got asked that a lot because I hit a milestone 5,000th game in April.
Now, is that an exact figure, or did you just make it up?
That was pretty exact.
All right.
There were 2 or 3 years between Bruce Bennett Studios and Getty Images where I estimated based on what negatives, what slides, previous games. I backed into a number in about 3 years there. But yeah, 5,000 games, and I was asked to provide like my top 10, and I found it kept changing because there's so many images. There's probably over 2 million images.
Wow.
Trying to edit it down, and I could probably come up with a top 10. But the top 1, if I was pinpointed, it was a Dennis Potvin hip check on Guy Lafleur, shot in black and white.
Going
Probably
way back.
around 77 or so.
Wow. So does it ever get old covering a cup clincher?
It doesn't get old. It's still exciting, but you're working.
Exactly.
You're not thinking about, oh, this is great. Look at these fans having a great time. Whether it's a team that you care about or it's another team. You're too engrossed in the moment. Please God, don't let me screw up. Don't let me let myself down, let my company down. Make sure you get the image, stay focused, concentrate on what the job is.
So how about in the locker room with all the champagne flying?
Well, those days have come to an end. The NHL now just lets an NHL photographer and the team photographer in the
Really?
locker rooms. I didn't enjoy that all that much. Your first problem is you go from the cold ice, you go to a hot locker room, and your lenses fog over.
Right.
So a couple of years, what a bunch of us would do is we'd have a camera sitting in the locker room, and then when you'd run into the locker room, you'd grab that camera because the lens and everything was all warmed up and ready to use. Other years that wasn't feasible. You'd go into the locker room with put a plastic bag over the camera and hope that most of your condensation would hit the plastic bag. Then you had to worry about getting smashed with champagne bottles and stuff.
Somebody cursing and going, "Hey, take a drink."
Yeah, usually it's spraying everyone.
Yeah. Oh,
soaking
you're
everyone.
here.
Yeah.
You're here. Let me do that. Have you ever snuck either a drink from the cup, or off the record raised the cup?
I did have a drink. I think it was one of the first Islander cups.
Sorry to hear.
I drank a little bit out of probably against the Flyers. No, I did get a little drink out of the cup then, and One of the years also that the Islanders won the cup, I was able to take the cup home, have a picture of my dog drinking out of the cup, photograph it in every room of the house, bring it to my parents' home.
Did you raise it?
I'm sure I did, yeah. Had to.
Had to raise it. Oh, that had to be good. Now, do you have a ring?
Nope,
No team
rings.
has given you a, well, the Devils have won and you've been a team photographer.
Yeah, 2 Stanley Cups with the Islanders, 2 with Devils, 1 with the Rangers.
And the Flyers.
0. I wasn't going to bring that up.
I
You brought
it
that up.
Oh, I lived through it.
Yeah, I think most of those teams looked at me as a company because it was myself and my other photographers working games. That's life.
Would have been nice to have a ring, though.
Would have.
A ring definitely would be nice.
Well.
And anything else? Anything that you want to bring up that I have failed to do?
Do you work on your hair for a long time before the interviews, or is this just natural?
This is. I usually ask a few times during the interview if my hair looks okay, because I have the hair pick and I poof it up. They actually put me on the screen once when I was shooting here.
Yeah.
I was part of the pregame pre-roll that ended up on TV because I'm just sitting there with the guy with the big poofy hair shooting pictures. So yeah, a little bit of work goes into it.
I used to be a little bit more poofed out, and people would recognize me. They still pick me out. My wife says, "Oh, I saw you." I just say, look for the Q-tip, along the boards, and you find Bruce. Hair's a little flatter these days, but I still walk through the stands, and people, occasionally scream out, "Hey, Einstein," or "Hey, Mark Twain," or stuff like that.
Well, I see it. Is there anything that you haven't done in hockey or in the NHL with photos that you still need to accomplish?
Wow.
Yeah, that just popped out of my
Yeah.
head. I'm sorry I didn't have that to send you earlier.
No, you kind of look at every game as a challenge and trying to see something different and trying to find something different. But what brings you back is hoping that that's the game that you'll get a stunner. That brings you to the rink
Bobby
every
Orr,
day. That sort of thing.
That type of
You
shot.
just never know. I shoot. Last year I shot 140 games, which is one of my highs, in a year. And it's always great because when you get to the rink, you never know what you're going to see.
Sure. Any superstitions? Because hockey players have a lot of superstitions when it comes to this. Like what skate goes on first and how to put the jock strap on.
No. I usually to start a game, I usually just kind of zone out a little bit. Like during the anthem, I'm usually just like staring at the ice and just trying to keep myself at a calm level, because it's really important to not be emotionally involved in what you're shooting. So what you want to do is bring yourself, not to sound like a TM kind of guy, but a little inner peace. Get yourself to a level so that you can concentrate. No prejudice, one team against another team, and just focus on the action and kind of be at peace with, if you miss a shot, you don't beat yourself over the head too often. Usually when you go home afterwards or the drive home from Philly for 2.5 hours, I'm constantly pounding the steering wheel if I missed anything.
Well, you still have the passion.
I still have the passion. It's still great. As I said earlier, I could be an accountant right now. Coming to the rink every day it's a dream come true.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks very much, Jared. It's been great.
So that was pretty cool down there, wasn't it?
Very cool.
And what do you think about the experience of getting down onto the bench?
Well, first of all, I've only been to like 2 Flyers games in my entire life, so it's rare for me to be even near the ice. And it was really cool to be on the actual bench, being literally like a foot away from the ice, and just seeing all the pregame festivities that they do, all the pre-production, I guess. Like they were singing the national anthem.
That's just for opening night, though.
For opening night, yeah, correct. But that was even cooler because they had like a band come out, practice for sound check.
Yeah.
All that stuff. So.
Yeah, and we've been walking down the corridor. We've done it for shows.
Yeah, for
but
shows
it's
I'm there all the
different.
time. But they don't have the ice, obviously. It's a venue, and yeah.
It was just great. All I can say is I miss the camaraderie of being in the press room. We didn't go to the press room this time, but when you go to the press room and you sit at the tables you got the announcers over here, you've got the officials that come in and have some food. You got the writers sitting at tables, you got the off-ice officials, and then you have like photographers that hang out and you have discussions. It's fun. And just one, I love hockey. 2, I love photography. And 3, it was great to sit there and have conversations with Bruce because we're talking hockey and we're talking photography. 2 things that I absolutely love. He's an Islanders fan.
I knew you would love that interview.
Yeah, well, my hockey knowledge was coming out of my head again because I don't use it very often.
I know you love talking about that stuff.
Just love hockey, talking about the history. And the one thing I didn't ask, and I asked him after the camera stopped rolling, was, is there? And I didn't ask this during the show, right? During the interview about the Hall of Fame.
I think that was off camera.
I think that was off camera at the end because I didn't think of it at the time. I had all these questions and I hit them all without even looking at my paper.
You did good.
Very
yeah.
rare. That I don't really. I have notes there because I make them because I do the research to make sure I can do an educated interview that it keeps flowing. I mean, he was great going into different stories.
Oh yeah.
But the Hockey Hall of Fame, I'm like, would you be inducted? Is there a photographer's wing of that? And there really should be. There really should be a wing because Marty Brodeur's dad was a hockey photographer. There's so many well-known photographers from hockey that should be. There should be a. I mean, if they didn't exist, you wouldn't have the photos of Bobby Orr.
Yeah.
Getting tripped, scoring those goals. You wouldn't have all of these photos that Bruce has captured and many other hockey photographers had captured. I absolutely think they have sports writers in the Hall of Fames and different Hall of Fames.
Yeah.
They should have photographers at this
That's
point
true.
in the Hall of Fame because they leave the lasting impressions. And I'm sure Sobel, the NFL Films guy, he passed away of cancer recently, but I'm sure if they didn't start NFL Films back in the day, they probably wouldn't have had all of this amazing footage. Anyway, that's another. Maybe I should try to get an interview.
I know people at NFL Films,
and my dad does business over there too.
Yeah, we a lot of kids in my school would intern there, and they still processed our film when we shot on our Bolexes and a couple older cameras.
Well, make a note. Let's see if we could find their head archivist or photographers and
my professor
something.
dealt with he worked there actually for a long time, so he knows all the people
because that would be cool to go do. But anyway, it was great talking with Bruce. It was. I can't believe all those years that I shot down there, we never talked. We never spoke.
But you always saw each other.
Boy, I always saw him. Well, he wouldn't have recognized me because I didn't have the hair back then.
Gotcha.
But just I would talk to his other photographers, and they were kind of like mentors. I could call them. They would critique some of my work. And just have these discussions. And it's amazing how the technology has changed. The fact that he got to take the Stanley Cup home.
That was mind blowing.
And
When he said
raise the
that,
cup.
I was like, what?
That was my
They let
main
him
question.
Take it home, I guess, for pictures and all that.
Well, what happens is there's a guy.
It's like imagine just driving with that in the back of your car.
But
I got
that's
the
what
Stanley
happens.
Cup.
There's a guy.
Yeah.
Whose job is to take the Stanley Cup.
Wow.
And he's the Stanley Cup keeper. Everybody on the team gets to spend a day with the cup and take it to Russia, to take it wherever they're from, to do stuff with. It's a replica of the cup. The original cup is in the Hall of Fame. That's been retired. There's replicas of it.
Now the replica is probably just as important.
Well, it's important, but there were some times where some partiers, they dented it and they had to fix it. That's why the original one is put away, and I think there's 2 other cups.
It's like the Liberty Bell.
Yeah, but it's really cool because you get your name engraved in it,
That's awesome.
stamped in there. But this was one of my favorite interviews that have happened. I think it flowed really well. I love the discussions. It's 2 things that I love the most. Is there anything you want to wrap up with from it? A lot of stuff always going on. And yeah, so big thank you to Bruce Bennett.
Oh, yeah.
Love that interview. Hopefully we can, I'm going to be sending this to Danny Clinch. I emailed the person and she connected me with the right person. So I will follow up with them. I will send them this, that we talked about it. Look, I now have a reach. I now have a reason for them to say, yes, you can now sit with Danny.
Dude's got like my dream job.
Does he? Mm-hmm. We'll go up there and we'll go into a studio.
That would be cool.
And do some kind of interview.
Let's do it.
And that's what it's all about.
A boot.
All right, so big thank you to Rode Microphone for all of their continued support. Same thing with Atomos. We got that contest still going on. We are taking submissions. I know people are working on it, so please send those in. Thanks to Alan's Camera from allanscamera.com. Thank you, Sutter.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Eckert.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, you, and I'm speaking to you out there in the world of the
beautiful you,
the internets. And that is where we're going to wrap up Raw Talk episode number 106. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.